Today's guest is Jed Simon. I met Jed when he was a student in my class just this past year. Jed came to Stanford as part of what used to be called the Sloan program and is now called the MSX program. And if you think that was worth the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent on branding, you need to retake your marketing class. In any event, prior to coming to Stanford, Jed has had a remarkable and interesting career, including starting a fintech company that he sold and doing some amazing things in the music and entertainment industry. Jed, so I want to, first of all, welcome to the show, and let's begin by giving us a brief kind of career trajectory.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much. I just want to say off the bat that your class is one of the most sought after classes at Stanford Business School. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but there's maybe Path to Power I don't know if it's number one. It's definitely in the top 5. And the notion that you take so much of the content, and the book is amazing, and if you pair that with the guests from the class who are also on your podcast, you're getting a GSB experience through sort of a free program. So this is a great public service, and in any event, so I'm very honored to be on here. So thanks for having me.
All right, so tell us about your career.
Okay, so career-wise, so taking it back, I grew up in Los Angeles. That's where I'm from. Right next to UCLA. My parents, my mom had a house on one side of UCLA, and my dad had an apartment on the other side. And I always kind of grew up back and forth between these kind of very stable household with my mom and kind of a little more of a chaotic bachelor kind of household with my dad. And it was a great childhood. I'm super fortunate to have such a supporting parents. I started playing water polo at a young age. I really wanted to play in college, and I found, I'm going to Brown University where I played water polo. I studied philosophy and had an amazing experience. When I graduated college, I was thinking about going to law school, and I had my eyes on Stanford. But I also was thinking about doing investment banking because I was a philosophy major, and I had like zero business experience. So with the long story short, I ended up getting into Stanford, but I ended up taking the job at Morgan Stanley, which we'll come back to because that's something that sort of bothered me, and there's sort of a full circle thing happening here, being back at Stanford. But in any event, I was in the media group, investment banking at Morgan Stanley. I then really wanted to work in the music industry, and particularly for David Geffen. So DreamWorks at the time was starting. I got a job there, which we can talk about. That was kind of a fun power practice. Worked at DreamWorks for a number of years, had a role in corporate strategy where we were in charge of sort of the capital raising, special projects. Like I had to build the model when Spielberg was buying a Gulfstream jet. So I was kind of negotiating that, which was fun. Sound stages, all that kind of stuff. Capital raising from Cheol Jae-dong, from our Japanese partner, Asmic Ace, and from Universal and Paul Allen. So I was in the middle of that kind of stuff. I then went to the music division where I was kind of the divisional finance, marketing, media, sort of online person for a number of years, which was an incredible experience. We ended up selling that business, and I flipped over to the international group for our film division. So I moved to London for a bit, did that, and then I ended up quitting. I sort of needed a little bit of a mental health break, and I really always dreamed of starting my own company. So through a process, I landed on starting a media payments business. We did lending and payments. We raised a lot of capital. We ended up selling it a couple years ago, and I was super burnt out and decided now's the time to go to Stanford. And I returned back and have done this MSX program, which I just graduated 2 days ago. As you can tell from the bags under my eyes, we're still I'm in this kind of reflection, resting period. So that's the story.
Okay, that's a great story. Now, David Geffen has a reputation as not being the easiest human being in the world to work for. He is consistent with my Path to Power course and the 7 Rules of Power book in the sense that he's put his name on a bunch of stuff, including David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center. But I'm told by people who have worked for him and with him that he is difficult. I assume that that's true. How do you navigate working for a difficult boss?
So let's start with your rules of power, because these are sort of these aren't necessarily rules we want, and I hear a lot of MBA students complain about them, but it's kind of like physics. It is what it is, and these rules are out there, and this is how the world works. So Rule 7 is success excuses almost everything. And I would say, if you read the David Geffen book, The Operator, which is one that, I was sort of tangential. I was there and I witnessed the whole process from when he supported it to when he turned halfway through and said he didn't want anyone involved, and it was craziness. But I'll say this: I've heard all the stories, and I've witnessed a couple things. I'll tell you a funny one, a firsthand one. But he's funny, he's smart, he's quick-witted, he makes fast decisions, and this guy is amazing, and he's remarkable. And yes, he's powerful, and yes, maybe he's a little bit scary, but he's such an interesting character. I mean, I didn't have that much direct interaction with him, and it was pretty funny because when I got my job at DreamWorks Records, my office was directly across from his, and I thought, oh my God, I did this thing to get the job at DreamWorks, which involved which we'll talk about. I got the job. I worked in corporate. I finally got over to the record company, and my office is directly across from Geffen's. And guess what? He never came to the office once. I never saw the guy. And actually, he came once for a meeting, but in like 6 years, he came once. Like, he is a work at home. He was a remote worker before there was such a thing. And I ran into him at a restaurant. There's a restaurant called Dantana's in LA, and I saw him once, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And I told him the story. I'm like, I did this, I did that. I freaking get the office. I'm so excited. And I'm like, I never saw you in the office once. He just laughed. He's like, hey, what can I tell you? I'm sorry. But he's a fascinating character. I'll tell you this. We were selling the company. There's and it was a confidential sale. Only about 3 of us knew we were even marketing it. There's a really prominent music attorney named Alan Grumman. He was like the biggest guy. He represented Michael Jackson, Madonna, you name it, all the record companies. He was the crucible of power. And I was on the phone with David, and we were talking about, the strategy. We had to send some decks around, all of that, and he calls his assistant. Maybe she just was listening on. He goes, hey, get Grumman on the phone. So the assistant answers the phone. She goes, Alan Grumman's office. He goes, hey, it's David for Alan. And she puts this on hold. She then comes back a moment and says, hey, David, where can Alan reach you? And in this like cold voice, like a scary voice, says, I just want to know who he's talking to right now, who could possibly be more important than this call. And she goes, hold on. And then the phone comes up, and it's funny because Alan's this powerful guy. He goes, David, like this really high voice, like, David, hey, so sorry, what's going on? And I was like, this guy is powerful. It's amazing.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've talked about is your use of the rules of power. I think you've got your favorites. So one is networking. Another one is breaking the rules. Why don't you talk about what you've done both at Stanford while you were in the business school and before to network and to break the rules? I love, for instance, your story about meeting one-on-one with about 70 or 80 MBAs.
Yeah, well, look, in terms of the rules of power, so what's interesting about coming back to school is, I didn't have this formal business education, but I've been through the ringer. I've made every mistake in the book, but there's some of these things I did figure out on my own, but I never had a real framework. It was more kind of instinctive, and I found that in a lot of classes. There's managing growing enterprises, there's formation of new ventures, but in your class, breaking the rules is something I've been doing since day one, and it's not sort of an unethical thing. I think some of these rules don't apply. Some of them are arbitrary, and I think Jason Calacanis sort of in his interview with you kind of laid it out perfectly. But one breaking the rule story, which you and I talked about, was early on. I had this job at Morgan Stanley. We alluded to that, and we had just done a bond offering for Grupo Televisa. This was like $1 billion bond offering for this Mexican media company. It was a big deal. And I was just finishing up. In fact, I had taken a job at DreamWorks, and I actually took a vacation the month before, a week vacation to start my new job. And then I had to go back and finish my other job. It was kind of like, it was a little bit of a tug of war at that point. But when we did the deal, the guy who was the CFO of Grupo Televisa came around our office and handed out Cartier watches to like 6 or 8 of us. And I'm like a 23-year-old, 24-year-old analyst, making not a lot of money. I had no watches. I mean, I still don't wear watches. And he hands me this like really fancy Cartier watch. And I'm thinking, fantastic, right? But the managing director of my group came around and said, hey guys, you got to get, like, I'm collecting the watches. You got to give these things back. You can't accept gifts over $50. And I thought, like, that's crazy. I'm leaving. Like, you're not going to be able to bribe me. What am I going to do? So I said, hey, Jeff, I left it at home. Let me bring it back. And I wrote a note, a letter, a memo to the CEO of Morgan Stanley. His name was Dick Fisher. And it said, Mr. Fisher, I'm a second-year analyst. I'm taking a job at DreamWorks. I really hope to be a client soon. I had a great experience. What a wonderful company. And then kind of like underlined it saying, we were given a gift of a watch. I pulled all these all-nighters, and a client was kind enough to give me a gift. And I understand there's a policy about receiving gifts. However, I'm leaving. Therefore, there's no sort of, moral hazard. And I think it would be in everyone's best interest, and it would be a real sign of a real honor if you'd allow me to accept this gift. And I'll take it with me as a memorandum or memento of my 2 years here. And I sent it off, and my boss was kind of bugging me. Hey, Jed, where's that watch? And so long, every day I was waiting for the interoffice. This is the interoffice memo days. There was email, but you'd also had these snail mail things. So one day the memo comes back. I open up the envelope, and it says, okay, really big scroll, like the Donald Trump kind of handwriting. It says, okay, Dick Fisher. So I went into Jeff's office, my MD, and said, hey, Jeff, Dick Fisher said I can keep the watch. He's like, great, fine, keep it. And I still have the watch. It's in a safe deposit box, just in case anyone's thinking about anything funny. But I probably have 100 stories like that.
You're definitely a rule breaker. But talk about also the networking, and for instance, the one-on-ones with your MBAs and and your other networking, because you did a lot of it.
Yeah. So just sort of to take it back a click, I'm very naturally introverted, and I know you may not believe that, but I'm a 10 out of 10 introvert. And networking, it's I can do it, but it is tiring. It's not my natural. I would say the one rule, which is the building the powerful brand, that one I really do struggle with, kind of like being very out there, posting on social media, doing those kinds of things. But networking, in your class, there was different guests who sort of talked about how they use networking, and there's certain pieces of that which really resonated. And I talked to my power coach, and she gave me some insight as well. And look, I recognized early on coming to Stanford that one of the key components of this place is not just the academics. People get too, academics are easy to to focus on, over-index on, because you get graded, it's straightforward, these things are assigned. But the real magic of Stanford is the student body, the classmates in MSX, and these MBAs. I mean, this is the hardest business school to get into in the world. These are the most exceptional students in the world, and they're all here. And it's a very friendly, welcoming place. So I decided about 6 months ago in your class that I'm going to meet as many of these MBAs, because I knew all my classmates. I wanted to meet as many of these MBAs as possible. So I started just, when I would be when I would go to Coupa, I'd be in class, I'd be in study groups. You get assigned study groups. Anyone I didn't know who I thought was remarkable in any way, or interesting or funny or cool or whatever it was, I said, hey, let's get coffee. And the answer resoundingly every time is, yeah, great, let's do it. And more often than not, they would throw a time on my schedule before I even had a chance to throw a time on theirs. So I think in the last 4 or 5 months, I've done on average 2 to 3 a day one-on-ones. And at this point, I've probably done one-on-ones with 80 to 100 MBAs. And it's really been a powerful thing. I think I've gotten like 15 Instagram requests in the last 2 days, like post-graduation, everyone has photos and stuff. And these are remarkable people. And I'll tell you a quick story actually, which goes back to your class as well. Is I had a one-on-one with someone who had been in one of my classes. And this person works at he's sponsored. It's a guy. He works at one of the large private equity funds, about 100 billion under assets. And I asked him, we sat down, I said, like, what's your goal? Like, what's your career goal? Like tell me in 10 years, like what role you want to have. And he's like, honestly, Jed, I want to run this place. I want to be the CEO. And I'm like, well, how old's the CEO now? And we kind of did the math and thought maybe 10 years may be a little aggressive, but 15 years is not an impossibility. He's like, Jed, what if you were me, what would you be doing? And the skills you have now to be a successful associate at this private equity firm are not the same skills that are going to get you to be the CEO. The more senior you get, the job description changes. You need to be an originator, a deal maker. Right now, you're just an analyst. You're processing. And I said, what you should be doing is you should be keeping a list of all of your colleagues at different firms, investment bankers, lawyers, and other sort of people in your role at all the different PE firms. And you should be meeting with them, having coffee with them, and most notably, there's like a couple of big conferences. You should go scout the venues out ahead of time, set up dinners, 12, 15 people, invite the key folks that you want to network with, maybe get someone to sponsor it, or pay for it yourself, and get to know these people. Get to know them all now, because a few of these folks are going to end up being very powerful. And as we'll talk about in a moment, it's a lot easier to meet powerful people when their guards are down or when they're not quite as powerful, and they may not understand, they may not see the trajectory as clearly as you do. And I said, look, the other thing you should do is, if there's people who aren't attending the conference, definitely invite them to this dinner, because they will be so appreciative of the invite. It doesn't cost you anything. Those are freebies. In my company, we do that all the time. We'd have big events in New York, Billy Joel concert at MSG. Tickets were thousands of dollars. And we made sure to invite all our clients on the West Coast. Maybe one or two of them would show up, but the rest of them were so appreciative, because you have to give things. You can't always ask. You got to be of service. You have to offer things. That's how you build relationships. I think too many people think of relationships as one-sided. This is what I need. But I think you have to start with the other opposite sort of framework, which is what can I provide to them of value? That's how you build relationships. So that's probably a long-winded answer.
That's a good story.
Sure.
So that reminds me, giving something to somebody reminds me of the story you told me the other day about this nightclub and a woman named Jen, the place that nobody you couldn't get into, but you got in because you offered her something. So why don't you tell that story as well?
Well, it's funny. This is probably not the normal GSB anecdotes, but let's go for it. We were talking, and it's funny because I was reflecting on, sometimes in your class, by the way, I would just kind of take notes and think about, like, okay, where have I been powerful and where have I not been powerful? I don't necessarily subscribe that people are necessarily, it's binary where they're powerful or not. There's maybe in certain circles and certain circumstances. But when I first moved to LA, there was, I had a lot more energy and we used to go out a lot. And there was this one nightclub on Thursday nights that was the hottest nightclub. It was kind of like the Studio 54 of its era in the early 2000s. And they would close off a lane on Santa Monica Boulevard. There would be hundreds of people outside. It was silly. It was like 300, 400 people trying to squeeze in to get to the person in the front who had the clipboard. So this woman, Jen, would walk inside. She'd come out for a moment, and everyone would scream her name. She'd kind of look around and go back in. And we could never get in this place. We tried once or twice. We're like, it's futile. But there was a restaurant next door called Dan Tana's, which is one of the great classic Italian restaurants in LA. And we were eating there one night, and we ran into this kind of powerful talent manager and said hi. And he's like, hey, I'm going next door. You guys want to come? And we're like, yeah, of course we want to come. Like, we're trying to be cool about it. We walk right in. This place is rocking. There's all these celebrities there. Britney Spears was that night. Justin Timberlake was there that night. It was just superb, right? Super fun. And but I wasn't enjoying myself. I was looking at the front door thinking, this is great, but I want to get in here every Thursday night. Like this one Thursday night is not going to do it for me. So I was watching this woman walk in from outside and being like, oh, taking a sip of this, looking at her list, looking around. Then she'd go back out. And the thing I noticed was at the end of the night, it was like 1 a.m, 1:30, that's when clubs close. She's just standing there by herself. All the people that were like yelling and screaming for this woman when she was outside, they just walk right by her on the way out. It's like, oh, thanks, I got what I need. They don't even look at her. And so I was like, I waited and I went up and I said, hey, Jen, I'm Jed Simon. I work at DreamWorks. I came in with so-and-so. She's like, yeah, of course. I said, listen, this place was so great. I had the best time tonight. What a awesome place. What's it like for you kind of getting yelled and screamed at? Like, what's your job like? Is that, does it give you anxiety? Like, you enjoy the power trip? Like, what's it like? It just seems like what a hard job. I wouldn't want to have to be in your shoes. It's like, well, it's fine. I know there's certain people I got to take care of, everyone else, We kind of talked for a bit. Then I did something which I do all the time now, which is, and God, I give this advice to everybody, and it's like these are the magic words, which is, so Jen, I love this place. I want to come back here. If you were me, what would you advise I do to be able to come back and come here more often? She looks at me and she goes, just have to ask. I'm like, well, I'm asking. She goes, here, take my phone number. Just text me, and it's not a problem. I'd love to have you back. Great. So the next week, sent her a text. Thought she wrote back saying no problem. I'm thinking, okay, let's see if this actually works. I didn't want to abuse the privilege. I just came with one friend. I didn't want to show up with like a full entourage. I walk up. We're in the back. It's packed. She comes out. We make eye contact. She goes, hey, come on in. We were in it. I was good, and I kind of like eventually maybe invited a couple more friends. And I think like you can always make friends on the way out. And this doesn't just relate to nightclubs. This is like. So another friend of mine from the GSB raised a Series A for his AI company, a $20 million Series A. And he got 100 texts, emails. Everyone's like, let's set up coffee, let's set up lunch. And he's just like, whoa. And I'm thinking, no. You can text him the week before for a lunch. But when he announces this thing, everybody's hitting him up and saying, let's do this. They perceive power and they want to get close to it. But you can't do that. You got to, if you really did want to get together with him before and you kind of missed your little window, you got to wait like a month, send him a congratulations, offer him something, send him a candle. But like, I don't know. I think that there's broader lessons to be learned from that kind of early formative experience trying to get into a nightclub in my 20s.
Yeah, I think it's a fabulous story, and it's and I really have enjoyed our conversation today. But I don't want to go on too much. If I asked you to tell me one more typical Jed Simon story, what would you say? Give me one more anecdote about how Jed Simon got to where he is actually.
Well, I'm going to break the rules here because you said one. I'm going to give you two short ones.
Okay.
But it'll add up to one, which is you talk a lot in class about the power of a first impression, and I want to say like there is, it's not like if you flub the first impression, there's no coming back. But I think that it's like maybe a 50x effort to get back to where you could have been had you done it right in the first place. At my company, my startup, we were a fintech company. We hadn't raised much money, I think $1 million or $2 million bucks. And we needed to get some validation. And we needed to get a line of credit from some sort of entity that would validate us. And I saw Wells Fargo Lender Finance. It was kind of the number one lender. And I got a meeting with Andrea Petro, who's like, she's the queen. She literally was like royalty. And we killed ourselves to get everything. We had a meeting. We had it in our investor's office. It was this beautiful space. We made these books. We had like everyone dressed nicely. Everything was set up. We had waters. It was this thing. And we had this meeting. And afterwards, she said, we're gonna normally we have a $25 million minimum for a loan. We're gonna make an exception. I'm gonna get back to you. So they ended up offering us a $12.5 million loan. But she said she wanted us to raise some capital, and she's like, from one of these places, I'll make the intro. So we ended up raising $10 million from an investment plus $12.5 million. It was like that one little thing had this cascading effect. So the first impressions are so important, and we got that right. And the other story is going to be getting the job at DreamWorks, because there were like 1,000 people applying for this one job I wanted. Maybe we had 2 slots, and I was calling the HR's office, and I would talk, and I would talk to the assistant. She'd say, "Hey, we got your resume. I left the message. I'm so sorry. There's nothing else I could do." And I did this a couple times, and finally I did the same thing, which we talked about before, which is I said to the assistant, I'm like, "Look, I've been working really hard. I work every day here at Morgan Stanley. I have the skills. I'm in the media group. Like, I think I'm a good applicant. I would love to be able to interview for it. If you were me, what would you do? Like, how do I break through this pile? And the woman said, I go home at 6. Cassie Thomas, who's the head of recruiting, or that she was the head of human resources for DreamWorks, says, Cassie goes home at 7. I'd call between 6 and 7. Maybe she'll answer her own phone. I don't know. So every night between 6 and 7, West Coast time, I was in New York. I would call a couple times, and once Cassie picked up the phone, she goes, Cassie Thomas, and I gave her the spiel. She's like, okay, great, Jed. Call Romelli's song and set up an interview. We'd love to have some. We'd love to meet you, and that's how it happened. So I don't know. I think being smart, kind of asking questions, using power here and there where necessary, and humility and genuine interest, relationships, and kindness. Those are sort of I think all things that work in the end.
Wow. That's a great story and a great way, I think, to end this podcast. Jed Simon, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Total pleasure. Thank you.